So with everything that's going on in the world these days, with the health concerns we've all dealt with in the last couple of years, and with the shootings and just all the madness that we've been dealing with, we want to talk a little bit about mental health, but look at it from a perspective of what is the average person that's not in that industry? What do they need to know? What can they look for? With you being a professional in the industry, and for many of you know, Maxine being the co-host, this is what she does. So let's just start with simple idea of what actually is mental health.
It's a good question. It's kind of a broad question, but I would say that, and there are many different definitions. But I would say that a general rule of thumb is not, are we experiencing a variety of emotions, or are the emotions uncomfortable? We all have discomfort in our lives. It's our emotions are on a whole continuum, a whole spectrum of normal. So having a wide range of emotions, some of them being great and some of them being not so great or quite unpleasant, um, is within the range of normal. What we find, and the way that we start to gain some sort of an inkling that there may be something bigger or more pathological unfolding, is, I would say, a good rule of thumb is the degree to which it causes one distress or discomfort in their daily functioning, or disruption in their daily functioning. So, um, for example, if somebody, God forbid, goes through a loss, let's say the loss of a loved one, they're going to be sad.
Yeah,
That's normal. That does not represent a mental health crisis. What it represents is the normal range of emotion within a uh, unfortunate or painful period of time in one's life.
absolutely.
So the DSM, which is the guidebook for mental health, that's what healthcare professionals go to for diagnostic criteria. It actually lays out different criteria that has to be met prior to saying that something is an actual diagnosis. So I hope that that answered it.
Well, I think so. Not being from the industry and not, from a coaching perspective, for all the years that I've done it, I've come across a lot of information on mental health. I am by no stretch of the imagination a pro. And let me say this very clearly here at the beginning. This is a podcast. This is not medical advice. Okay. So even though Maxine is a professional, this is not medical advice. So we're going to talk about if there's something going on in your life. We're going to be talking about that today, and looking at some resources of where we can go, the kinds of people, places we could look, who we could talk to, and just how we can deal with things when it's not severe on our own. Like, that's the whole point, is from a mindset perspective, how do we look at mental health from our own viewpoint? How do we grow in a way that helps us recognize mild and or potentially growing mental health concerns in ourselves or in others, in people we care about, and what can we do about it? And I know some of the research I did was saying that there's well over 40 million people in the United States alone that deal with mental health. And and there's just a variety, and there's so many of them that are really common. So I guess the next question that would make sense, or hopefully make sense for the listeners, is what are kind of the more common ones that maybe we think of? Because I know there's a ton of misinformation out there and people don't really understand it. I figured that out doing my own research as well. But what are some of the more common ones that most people deal with at some level?
Yeah, I would say the among the most common that I see um, would be anxiety and depression. You know, those are very, very common mental health diagnoses that sort of creep into our our way of being in the world and our experiencing discomfort. I think, there are obviously the bipolars, and by the way, even within anxiety and depression, those are very broad categories. They each have specific criteria as well that break down into single episode, or whether or not there may be psychotic features attached to them. So it does become a little bit more complicated, but I would say just garden variety anxiety and depression are the things that are most integrated and kind of creep into everyday life for many of us.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know myself in my family, I've experienced depression with different family members. Anxiety, I've known a lot of people. I never felt I had depression or anxiety for years. I just thought, hey, I get a little nervous, I get a little excited. And I do understand that, like when they, I don't know how it would be said, when they hook up uh, meters or electrodes to us, right? Excitement and nervousness or anxiety or fear relate. They register pretty similar to each other. So I never recognized it. And I thought, hey, everybody gets sad. I never considered that I ever had any level of depression or even anxiety until I really started looking into it. And I realized, holy cow, almost everybody I know deals with this.
Yeah.
I'm a playful person, so I'll try to crack jokes about it and make light of it. And you know what? That's okay. I believe, and maybe you have a different opinion. Um, it Sometimes we need to lighten the message or the feeling we have about a serious subject, but then there's a time to actually do something. So for someone like myself who's not in the industry again, and though I help a lot of people through coaching that deal with that
Yeah.
certain
Yeah,
aspects
you
of
do.
that, um, but from a more serious standpoint or even a mild standpoint, how do we recognize the difference?
You mean when it becomes something that is pathological versus something that's just sort of a nuisance that's kind of more transient? Is that
Yeah,
what you're asking?
yeah, something where, like, hey, you know what, if I'm feeling really down for a day or even a week, if I lose somebody or a period of time, right? Everybody experiences it different. Everybody has different ways of soothing themselves and trying to get over traumas or depressions or whatever, whatever it may be for them. But just in general, how do we know the difference of, okay, this is mild, this is normal, what can we look for so that we know, all right, this is getting beyond something I should be handling for myself, or maybe a loved one. Maybe I should step in and help this loved one because this is maybe going a little beyond mild.
Yeah. Again, this is really where we look to the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, for the criteria in order to be able to identify, it has this gone into an area that is no longer just uncomfortable, but and will pass through it, but rather this, I may need some intervention. And if God forbid, as we use that example, that somebody experiences a loss, if they weren't grieving, if you didn't see sadness, if they were just continuing without hitting any sort of discomfort, that we would look at almost as pathological. There, that would raise some red flags, because there is a normal behavior and anxiety, depression, other uh, types of discomfort that one experiences with unfortunate life circumstances. So it is when it hits either a threshold of difficulty in functioning, and also the length of time. And there are specific criteria and symptoms that we look for to say, you know what, this is more than just that, right? Again, grief is grief, and we all go through it, and it's terrible, and it comes and it goes. But if it comes and it doesn't go, then and we use diagnoses in order to be able to gain a better understanding of the treatment plan, because having a diagnosis can be very polarizing and very um, stigmatizing. And we talk about this often in the industry, how stigmatized mental health diagnoses can be. So
Yeah.
using a diagnosis, we use it mainly to be able to have an understanding of what this may encompass and how do we treat it.
Hopefully, listeners are getting a little bit of better information than what they're used to hearing out there. So, look, I'm a guy, right? My dad
You
was
are.
old school, tough guy, walk it off, and that was always my way of dealing with stuff. I'll deal with it my way. I'll go into hide mode. I'll anti-social mode for a while, or what I call, you've heard me say it before, angry Michael. Right? There was a couple of different time frames in my life where I didn't realize what was affecting me, but I became an angry person. I was. It's funny. A lot of people were still thought I was, being nice, but um,
I'm sure you were.
and loving and caring. But there were some things that some situations where I just wasn't, and it went on for a very long time. Went on for a few years, twice in my life, and this is what I want to get for the listeners. And depending upon the platform that you're listening to this on, there may be some comments that you can add. There's all ways to reach out to us, and we'd really want to promote engagement. Like if you have questions about this kind of stuff, this is what we're here for. We really, really want to not just come on and talk and deliver a message. We want to engage. We want to have conversations that are, you know, hey, I dealt with this situation, and we will get to a point on the podcast where we're actually doing live calls.
Yes. So, and you, it's okay if you say no, but you mentioned two different periods of time in your life where you experienced uh, acute anger. Do you mind sharing one?
Sure. So I had a situation where I was engaged and I thought I was going to become a dad. And then I found out that individual, who was very much against the action that she took, she ended the pregnancy.
Mm,
I found out much later that it wasn't even mine. And that was part of
mm,
the reason why she did what she did. Needless to say, I didn't think I could have kids. So when I thought I was having one, I was angry because I had no say so.
mhm.
Matter of fact, I was very, very bluntly and directly lied to about it. And it sent me into a tailspin,
Yeah.
to the point where I don't remember 3 days of my life. I blacked out. I woke up in Palm Springs,
Hmm.
3 days later. Have no idea what I did. Um, Lost my job, obviously, because I no showed for 3 days straight.
Hmm.
I wound up walking away from my cars, my house. I just called the banks and said, take them back. And I was a very angry person for a few years, which worked out because I went into jobs that aggressive mentality worked, car repo and high end security work and stuff. So, ironically, I kept coaching people. Funny thing was, I was still really good at that because I recognized what they were going through. I didn't go get help myself. So that leads me to the next question, and that is, how do we know when it's time? And a lot of people, and I'm sorry I'm going on this, but I want to make this point. A lot of people think, oh, I'll just go to my doctor.
Yeah.
But it's my understanding now, doctors have some level of the most basic of trainings, probably less than I've learned in my research, of what to do. Where do we go? How do
Yeah.
we know when to go there? What do we do?
Yeah.
Again, not medical. I want to say this again, not medical advice, but we want to create some conversation around mental health, which is increasing. The numbers show that. We just want to initiate some conversation, and Maxine has the ability to say, look, if you think or if you feel this, then this is what you would generally want to look into. So,
Right. And I'm sorry that that happened. I mean, it sounds like it must have been really quite an excruciating experience. And if you don't mind me adding a little bit of light to what sounds like happened in your experience was, that 3 day period of time that you talk about is actually referred to as a dissociative fugue. And what happens is that we go into a place where experiencing um, what is presenting in our lives is so uncomfortable, and we're so ill equipped to be able to hold it and process it, that we literally dissociate. That
yeah,
and during those periods of time, that really acute traumatic period of time, um, our brain is not integrating information. If we're not integrating information of what's going on, we are not in the here and now. We are not in the present time. We are not able to gauge what's going on in our lives. Um, we are not keeping track of time. We are not able to be grounded in our life on life's terms. Your brain had a singular focus. And you were talking about, how do you know when it's time to get help or get support? That would have been a time to get help or support. That would have been a time where,
yeah,
had you been, with family members or friends or colleagues who had an understanding of what was happening in your life, and likely you didn't share it with them, um, that would have been a time where they could recognize the signs of mental health distress. It's interesting that you refer to it as anger. Anger is not a primary emotion. It is always a
true,
secondary emotion.
true.
And so the question really would be, and it's interesting because oftentimes in men specifically, when we are looking at different diagnoses, we base it on a sometimes on different criteria. One of the criteria with men in in diagnosing depression is agitation, anger, right? You think, oh,
Yeah.
depression, you're going to be weeping, you're going to be sad, you're going to be sleepy, um, in your
No,
bed.
I was
Not,
pissed off,
yeah,
period.
right.
I was,
So if we really break it down, if we really, really broke that down and went into what was happening, my guess, and we don't have to com- completely dissect you here, but my guess is that the primary emotion um, was fear, um, and likely sadness.
yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
anger, right? Why do we use anger? Anger is that emotion that we use in order to rev up and to accumulate enough energy to go into action,
Yeah,
to be able
exactly.
to protect ourselves. When do we protect ourselves?
Yeah,
When we are vulnerable, when we are vulnerable to the elements or to people who are not caring for us, um, we are likely fearful.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And that for sure, that was my situation there. And I understand after that experience, um, that was one of the experiences that caused me to try to learn a little more about it.
I'm not going to make you tell over the seconds. It's okay.
Thank you.
But I do
Um,
appreciate that you were willing to share that, because I think people, I think it's often very comforting for people to hear anecdotal representations from other people in order to be able to identify those things within ourselves.
yeah, yeah. And, I understood that I've understood for years that anger is usually the sign of something else going on,
Yeah.
right? It's our way of coping with some other stress, type of stress or stressor, um, trauma, what have you, in our lives. And we know that happens more often than not with men. But what are again? I want to speak to the listeners and say, okay, here are a couple more things that are very common
Mhm.
that maybe you see, and if you recognize them, here's the type of thing you should do. Is it go to my physician and
Yeah.
tell my physician, hey, I'm really feeling this. Where do I go? Or, I mean, now you see this all the time on commercials that,
Yeah.
hey, if you're feeling this, call
Yeah,
this
yeah,
number.
yeah,
And there's all
yeah.
these groups
I
out
have a
there.
lot of opinions on that one too.
Well,
So,
we want to get into those because, the reality is we don't know. And that's why they market that way. They know that we don't know what to
yes,
do.
that's
And
right.
so they market to, I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination, these companies, these agencies, these groups and people are not trying to help people. I'm not saying that they're not capable. I've never called one. I don't know. I do know because I've been in the industry, the coaching industry so long that, let's just say, from a professional,
It's a business.
it's a business.
It's a
It's
business.
a business. Thank you. Yes.
So to answer your question, and I do think in some ways, yes, there may be some good as on um, primetime TV or a daytime TV. They know to whom they are pandering based on the demographic and the drugs that they are um, recommending. And in some ways, it does raise awareness that they're saying, oh, if you are experiencing XYZ symptoms, speak to your doctor about such and such drug. But it does. There is also an element which is really just it is a for-profit industry, so they are definitely profiting by doing this. But that being said, your question was, what does one do? Perhaps I'm biased as I am a therapist, but I believe that starting with a therapist is the best place to start if one is experiencing mental health distress that they think is creating a disruption in the way that they are functioning or such discomfort that they are in chronic distress for a prolonged period of time and they don't seem to be getting better. There's this old adage that, if the only tool you have is a hammer,
Everything
everything
looks
looks like
like
a
a nail.
nail, right? So if
Yeah.
if you are looking for psychiatrists prescribe medication, and I do believe that there are conditions under which mental health issues and diagnoses must be treated with medication. Without a doubt, it is life saving for many many people. And then, but there are those cases where medication can be prescribed, but if the core of the issue is not addressed, is not processed, is not explored, then medication alone won't cure it. And in fact, one of my specialties is working in the field of addiction. And, many people come by it very honestly. They are in emotional distress. They are prescribed medications to help them with their depression, to help them with their anxiety. And within a very short period of time, it becomes its own animal. It
And
is
it's spirals.
it takes on its own life,
Yeah.
and people become addicted to it. And so I'm not in any way suggesting that antidepressants or anti-anxieties do not medications do not, or mood stabilizers, they absolutely have a place in mental health treatment. I don't think I would start there. I would recommend, if one is experiencing distress, have a conversation with a therapist.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to add one more thing.
Go ahead.
One more thing is, I cannot tell you how many people, women, um, will tell me that their gynecologist is prescribing their antidepressants
What?
or their anti-anxiety medications.
You're kidding
I
me.
kid you not. No. And it is very, very common because it is a it is, they're very comfortable speaking with their gynecologists. And gynecologists
Uh,
they specialize in a particular part of the body, and it ain't that. So
okay, so
I'm
I've got to ask. I got to jump in here. I don't want to say more like moral code. Clearly, there should be there.
right, the
Isn't
scope of
isn't
practice.
there legal concerns again? not medical advice, not legal advice, but would they have to talk to somebody else that specializes in that to
Right. So I
get that
believe that
approved?
some of it is, it has to be, in some regard, it is within their scope, because oftentimes they will identify fluctuations in hormones as one of the reasons why they are experiencing such dysregulation in mood. And so it is, it's not criminal. I'm just saying that it wouldn't be where I would start. If it wouldn't be check in with a therapist, if that doesn't work, go to the gynecologist, right? That's not what I would say.
Gee, never mind.
That's right.
I, I,
Have a pap smear, right? Like that just wouldn't go there.
it's funny you say that. Again, this podcast in general really focuses on the mindset of things,
Yeah.
and how do we think about this? How do we think about anything in our life? How do we process? Um, and that's the key that really jumps out to me is a lot of people, and I say this, a lot of people meaning me, okay, I ignored it. I figured I could deal with it on my own. um, and I always have, um, felt that way. That was my mindset, right? I can do this. And where I want to get to with clients and listeners, um, is to let go of a little bit of the ego of it,
Yeah.
or the fear of rejection, or of, being judged. Right? Literally, every human being deals with these issues, multiple issues that could, if it gets to a certain severity, fall under mental health. Again,
Diagnoses, not just within the range of normal, but
right,
you're saying pathological.
right,
Yeah.
and that's so the pathological, the serious, is where the most recent research I did, and I don't know this to be 100% accurate at this point, but I literally just did this research in the last couple of weeks, was that as of last year, approximately 40, I think it was 42 million, forgive me if that, but I know that's close to what it said. um, and I did quite a bit of research on it. So that's the level of people that deal with it from a kind of a midline to a more serious, but that virtually every person has some, not even some type, that they deal with. Again, we deal with anxiety,
Yeah.
we deal with depression, we deal with, um, I had some notes, and I was actually going to pull them up and read them, but I'm remembering some of them. So some of the more popular ones, anxiety and depression, were always the top two, no matter where I looked.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Like,
they're the most um, integrated of the mental health disorders into our vocabulary. So people are the most familiar with those diagnoses, with that experience, and I think they are the two least stigmatized diagnoses
yeah, that
as
that would
well.
make sense.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. So I know, like, it talked about schizophrenia. That one, of course, in my life, in my circles, always kind of turned into more of a,
Right. It's always used pejoratively. We sort of
thank
use
you.
it
Yeah.
like a right, right, right,
Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah. We're turning into a joke. So, um,
Don't.
but but it is serious. And
It
again,
is.
I'm a playful person. I like to joke around. You know that. But there's a time when things need to be taken serious, and then so I know traumas are such a wide area of conversation, and specifically, and we were speaking the other day about this, the difference between trauma, or a trauma, versus, as an example, and I'm going to say this right this time, PTSD,
Do you
post
want
traumatic
do
stress
you want to
disorder.
share how you said it the last time?
PSTD.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah, it's not
PSTD.
a
No, no,
PSTD,
it's not.
though that would probably give me some trauma. Luckily. Yeah, and you know what? We won't, maybe we'll bring on some other kind of expert to talk about that, because
Yeah.
that's a very serious
We'll
topic.
get the OB, the
Yeah,
gynecologist who's
the guy,
prescribing that. That's
bingo.
right.
I was in shock when I found out what the numbers on those are these days. Wow. Um, back to our subject, which again, this is a every Monday show now,
Right.
so we're going to be talking about all of this. But it was um, like if it interferes with your life, right? Your thinking, your processing, your being able to get out of bed, right? A day or two, hey, we get it. You have a massive loss, you know. I mean, I admitted when my mom passed away, and I was super close with my mom. Yes, mama's boy right here, admit it. Um, I was at work the next day, but we knew for years my mom was going downhill. And I had a conversation with my mom, and it was that when she said, I can't do this anymore, that no matter what my sisters or even her sister felt, um, that I would push her a little bit and say, are you sure, mom? But when she said I'm done, she was done,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I was at work the next day.
Right.
Some people they just can't do that. So what what else? And again, we'll continue this conversation into other areas. What can we look for as, you know, Coach Michael on the street? How do I know, how do I really recognize within myself or specifically within loved ones?
Yeah. By the way, I mean, what you're describing, and this is very common, and I think oftentimes people feel a certain sense of guilt when a loved one passes away, especially somebody who's elderly, who's unfortunately dealing with a prolonged illness. Um, my guess is that you were grieving for a long time prior to your mom passing,
Oh,
and in situations like that,
many
that
years.
actually has a diagnosis as well, which we think, well, why am I'm grieving, but my mom is still alive, right? It's called anticipatory grief,
I've
right?
I've read about that. I forgot
Yeah.
that term. Yeah.
So that oftentimes people actually experience some relief when their loved one who's been suffering for such an extreme for an extremely long period of time um, is no longer suffering. It's and a lot of the processing has already occurred
Occurred.
through the anticipatory grief.
And then we feel
The
guilty
divide.
because we feel relieved,
Yeah,
right?
you
I
could.
mean, I've come across a number of people that felt that way. It
Yeah,
was a few months ago. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, an ex coworker from one of my jobs, good friend of mine, and and he said that. He said
yeah.
I felt relieved and I felt guilty,
Hmm.
about that. And of course, I asked, was he, to what level, to what extent was he talking to anybody? Um, and it wasn't really serious. He knew why he felt guilty, and he had conversations with his wife about it, and they talked about it, and his siblings,
Hmm.
and that's the kind of, to me, those are the kind of things that we should be doing, right? If I see that, my sister or my cousin or my good friend is going through some troubles, and it keeps going, and they're just not their normal selves. My suggestions when I talk to people is just have that conversation. Be that. So there's a big difference between sympathy and empathy, right? Um, be that person that can have that conversation. Maybe we'll get into that on a different show, a different episode. But be that person they can talk to and guide them. So again, are we guiding them to, hey, maybe you should set a doctor's appointment and just share what you're feeling?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think to go back and answer your question, which was, I think, if you can remind me, the question was, when do you know if it has crossed over into a pathological experience versus not? Was that the question?
But yeah, a point where hopefully before what can we recognize before it gets to that point and say, I want to stop this before it goes there, right? Or I want to help you stop this before it goes there.
I think, one of the things that I ask clients when they come in and they describe a way of being or some way of functioning or some discomfort, um, we take a history and I ask them, well, how long has this been happening? How long has this been going on? How long have you been experiencing it? And based on what they say, we're able to gauge a little better understanding of really what their baseline is.
Yeah.
So there are those who sort of ride light in life. We know them, they just kind of bounce through life and things roll off of them, and that
Yeah.
has something to do with their disposition, just their way of being, personality, and then there are those that just have the weight of the world on their shoulders, and they just, you know, so it it requires. I wish it were a very simple um, one size fits all um, answer, but the reality is that it's very individualized. In
Yeah.
fact, here's a funny story. So I'm of Jewish descent, and when I was in graduate school, I found this to be very insightful and reassuring in a terribly unfortunate way. But so we were learning to administer different types of psychological assessments, and we came to this one particular assessment, and the person who was doing the assessment said, so the average range, most individuals fall within this range and this range, whatever the numbers were, and that anything within that range is average and normal, unless you're Jewish, in which case the range for anxiety skews much higher because it's cultural, it's transgenerational. It literally is in our DNA. It is both
Yes.
in our DNA in transgenerational trauma, so it is in our biology and in just in the
Yeah.
way that we are, in the way that the genes have been expressed through life experiences of my ancestors, and it's also in what was modeled for me in my home. And just, I want you
Yes.
to know, I did apologize to my children. I did apologize with a very whole heart.
If you're, I know you're listening.
I know I
Tell
did.
me if she didn't.
I did.
Teasing.
I gave them some. I always say I gave you good eyebrows, though. Like that, you got. They all have good eyebrows.
Yeah.
But they also have my anxiety, and that is, you know,
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because I have the different sides, and I can see those now. Especially over the last, I don't know, I'd say 10 years, but no, maybe 8, and then specifically over the last 2 or 3 years, where I really recognize the traits that I got from my parents.
yeah,
The depression and the expression of that coming out in anger,
mm,
even from my mother. I'm going to say it this way: depression, which expressed itself as frustration,
hmm,
which then turned occasionally into anger.
yeah,
Um, and for my dad, again, old school, tough love, right? So those that knew my dad knew that, like, he loved people, like he really had a good heart. But the majority of people that came across him could recognize that, and then every once in a while you're like, whoa, where did this guy come from? And it was anger, and it was frustration, and it was just a whole different person, and I didn't understand that when I was young. And quite frankly, that's part of what got me interested in learning about coaching and learning about people, like at the age of 19. That's what got me started in that. And when I got introduced to Tony Robbins, I was like, wow, I got to learn about this stuff. This is amazing.
yeah,
Because I wanted to figure out, why in the world did it take until I was 18 years old for me to feel like I had a relationship with my dad, right? We won't get into that, but that's a whole nother segment. But look, my point in all this is, if you're for those listening, watching, what have you, this is common. This is so common to feel these way, to feel these things, to have it express itself differently. As you said,
yeah,
it's an individual thing. We want to be resources for that. And there's only so much we can share. We could go on for a 3 or 4 or 5 hour session. Trust me, we could do that easy. And we will, but it'll be broken into like 30-minute segments every Monday. Because there's so much to talk about, and not just theory. We want practical application. So as you said,
right,
look, if you're feeling it, don't feel embarrassed. Don't ignore it. Don't blow it off as if I'll deal with this on my own. Go ahead and talk to somebody. Most insurances now, right? They have plans that cover some level of call in and get some help.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, most insurance policies do have a carve out for mental health. Many employers also recognize the importance of mental health, of mindset, of and many actually integrate it um, into their policies for their employees, where they will bring in somebody who will do some meditation, some mindfulness with them, provide resources for mental health providers. I know that there are certain companies who have who self-insure outside of the healthcare policies that they provide for their employees. Everybody to me is a client, so for their employees, they have they self-insure to provide mental health support for their employees should they have a need. Um, but I do want to go back. You know, I apologize to my children in advance for using them as material. Um, but I will say that when they were younger and they would experience some sort of discomfort, and they would come to me and they would say, "Can you help me? I'm feeling this way, or I'm just feeling sad, or I'm feeling um, anxious, or I don't know why I'm feeling this way. I just feel weird. I feel," they were quite young and they didn't quite have language for it. It's really important to have language for it. It's really important to be able to lean in and to say, this is what I'm experiencing. By the way, it was almost always as the sun was setting that they would start to experience those feelings. And almost always after like this crazy fun weekend of like amusement parks and sleepovers and late night movies with friends and yummy food. And then it was like, okay, it's 5 o'clock on Sunday and it's time. And as things were slowing down, it was that switching gears, and the sun was setting, and they would just feel like, oh, this doesn't feel right. So
You literally just gave me the chills. Like my whole body right now is like getting
why
hot.
why
You're making me recognize the way you just said that at the at what did you say, sunset at the
yeah,
end of the day, right?
sundown.
After this fun and exciting weekend. And think about that. Like you have a friendship, you have a relationship with a sibling or a spouse or whatever, a job. And and then that person passes away, that person moves away,
Yeah,
that job lets you go. You move and you can't stay at that job. And if you truly, truly enjoyed that relationship or that job, it's the end of the weekend. And you have to, like, that's not going to happen again for at least a few more days. In this case, in our minds, we're going, this may not happen again. Or if not, it'll be a few years before I build that kind of a relationship with someone else. And again, this is how common it is. How often do we have people move away, jobs that change, coworkers that leave? That was our buddy, that was our friend at
yeah,
work.
yeah. And for children, it's on a micro level, right?
Yeah.
It's at the end of the weekend. Yeah, they'll see their friend at school, but they've got another 4 hours of being alone, which is absolutely excruciating. How am I going to get through this feeling? But which is why um this idea of we name it to tame it, that when we are able to give it language, when we're able to use our vocabulary to identify the experiences that they're experiencing, A, it normalizes it, and B, it actually reduces it.
Yeah.
Because rather than it being this very obtuse and completely um, pervasive experience, that just like, I just feel awful. Well, is it that you just feel awful, or is there a part of you that is feeling awful? Let's identify that part. And
Yes.
and
Yeah.
there's this beautiful idea in Judaism where they talk about the two different people, and we may feel this. Many of you may feel this, have felt this in your own lives, where when you approach a person, that you haven't seen in a long time, there's a certain excitement, and you go right back into a certain dynamic or experience or repartee that you have with that person that you don't have with anybody else. And so there's this idea that both, that you have your own energy and your soul, if that's what one wants to call it, and the other person has theirs. And when those two combine, there is this experience that can only be experienced with the combination of those two
Yeah.
entities. There's a actually what's considered to be a third entity.
Third
We're
entity.
not getting super spiritual here, but there is, we feel it,
But
right?
it's,
We feel it when we're in love. We feel it when we don't have good chemistry with another person.
yeah, it's not even just spiritual. I mean, this is science as well,
It is.
right?
It
This
is.
is this. Everybody feels this, right? I mean, any relationship. You have one friend you feel really good in this particular way with. You have another friend or person, coworker, whatever, where that energy is just different,
Yeah.
right? We talk about it all the time. You walk into a room, you can feel the energy of
You can
that
feel
room.
the energy.
Most people
Yeah.
can, even
Yeah.
people that aren't extremely intuitive.
Yeah.
I and you said this a couple of times to me. I happen to be extremely intuitive.
You are extremely
I
intuitive.
I feel things almost to a fault sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, and I literally spent 9 years training myself to do that.
So I'm going to hop back, and I just want to go back and weigh in a little bit more before we conclude on this idea of mental health, and really, I guess, summarizing with the importance of recognizing that mental health and our emotional being, our emotional experiences, they are on a full continuum, and so not every discomfort is pathological.
Right.
Not and I think recognizing it, understanding it, having conversations about it, having conversations with our children about it to be able to help educate them so that they have a clear understanding that that's not um, that doesn't warrant a pill, right? You're feeling bad at the end of the day.
Yes. Thank
Let's
you.
think about what's happened, right? They actually had this incredibly beautiful, expansive, enjoyable, high energy experience with this other person, with this other soul, with this other dynamic that's created between the two of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's sustained. And what they're saying is, I'm feeling that drop. I'm feeling the dissipation of that dynamic and of the way that I've been co regulating with another person, and I'm experiencing a letdown.
Yeah.
And so recognizing what that is and being able to language it, being able to say to our children, to our colleagues, to our clients, to our coworkers, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I have that too. Or can I take a guess at what I think it might be? And to be able to use language to identify, and we name it to tame it. We
Yeah.
When we can say that, I can't tell you the level of comfort. I mean, I can just picture my kids sitting on the front porch now at the end of a sleepover when they were little, and saying, can you help me process my emotions? Because I'm just not feeling okay. I'm just feeling bad, and I don't know why. So normalizing it,
Yeah.
saying, yeah, you know what? We have a whole range of emotions, and this is one of them. And here's the good news: every emotion has three things: a beginning, a middle, and an
And an
end.
end. Yeah.
And this will end. But right now you're in the middle, and when it ends, something else will come up.
Something else will come up, and you literally read my mind. The naming it was what I was going to talk about. That's what I kind of wanted to finish on, because it's something that we do
Yeah.
in like NLP. There are different aspects of where we look at a situation a person's in, or an emotion, or a feeling, and the differences between them all, and what am I really feeling versus what do I think it is, and to be able to speak to it specifically. And I mean, how many kids? Okay, let me tell you, my parents and I never had the conversation of help me process my emotions, right? I
Well,
mean,
no,
my mom would
yeah,
say, honey, are you okay? You seem sad. What are you angry
It's a
about?
different
Whatever.
generation.
But
Right.
it's a different mindset,
It is a different
right?
mindset.
It's who you are as a person. And I know this because over the time that we've been talking and talking about setting up this podcast and everything that we've discussed, it's who you are as a person. It's part of who I am as a person. From a different perspective, definitely not a clinical master's level perspective by any stretch or knowledge base, but
Well, you're pretty knowledgeable.
well, I spent 30 years learning about it just from a worldly experience, but that doesn't mean that I don't struggle with these things. As they say, the cobbler's children are the worst shod, right? Or
Yeah.
the mechanic's car always breaks down, or if, whatever. There's a
I don't know
dozen
what that means
sayings,
for my children, but yeah, I
you
hear
know.
you.
Um, and the reality is, just because we're good at helping other people or recognizing it in other people doesn't mean we're good at dealing with it ourselves. And that's part of the core of what we want to do on this podcast, is to say, look, we want to look at everything from a mindset perspective. If you're willing to step back and say, I want to level up, I want to level up my mind, my thinking, my life, right? Everything, my friendships, all my relationships. To me, everything boils down to mindset and relationships.
Yeah.
And when we can recognize that, and we can look at it or we can look at mental health from that perspective and say, I want to understand this more. I want to because that's what's going to help me learn to be emotionally intelligent. It's going to help me level up in that range. It's going to help me, be there for the people that are important to me. It's going to help me through my challenges,
Yeah.
recognizing what it is, and the different levels that it comes in at. So,
I was just
share
going to add
anything else?
on is, because again, this is really about it really is about mindset, and I imagine myself sitting on that front porch with my children who were then young, and being able to illuminate for them what may have been happening, and giving them more insight into, well, this is what might be happening. Does that sound right? Does that feel like it fits
Yeah.
for you? And saying, going on that exploration, it didn't change their feeling of letdown. It didn't change that their feeling of,
Good point.
my friend is no longer here, and now I've got to like prepare for school tomorrow and take a bath and eat dinner and brush my teeth and do all of those, pedestrian mundane things that I had to do, and it doesn't feel as good as the weekend felt.
Right.
But what it did do is it gave them a different mindset. It gave them a mindset of, okay, this also is part of life. And
Yeah.
that is so important, to adjust the expectation and to recognize that there is a certain beauty in having that full range of emotion. But it really is, once we were able to illuminate that and say, this is normal. Of course, it makes perfect sense that you would
Yeah.
feel this way. I also felt that way. The feeling itself didn't change, but the way they felt about the feeling changed. And that's mindset.
That's mindset. There you go. So, well, obviously appreciate the insight from your level
With
of it. It's
pleasure.
it's an it's an area that I want to get better at. Again, this is the kind of conversation we're going to be having every Monday, and we want to do practical application. So, summary of that. Look, it's normal. We all deal with this.
Yeah.
We all see family members and friends and coworkers deal
By
with
the
this.
way, there is actually a diagnosis if you are not feeling emotions called anhedonia, where it's the absence of feeling. Well, it's really the absence of. We'll just leave that there. But yes, but
We'll
you
come back
want
to
to
that.
feel that. You want to feel a broad range of emotion in your
Yeah.
life.
We are going to come back to that, actually, because over the next couple of episodes, we're going to be talking about the more common ones, digging a little deeper into what to look for, a little more practical application. Um, some of the ones from the anxiety and the depression and the PTSD. Um, and
PTSD is not funny.
it's not funny. Um, and while we won't get into that, I know I know a lot of people, primarily men, that deal with it from military.
Yeah.
You know what? We'll save that for the next episode
We
because
will.
that
But I'm going to give
goes
a little
deep.
teaser because I think what happens is that it becomes, if we don't have these conversations, people don't recognize that it's pathological. They don't recognize that it is so prevalent and that it has really hijacked where they are in their life and what their baseline is. So that's why
Yeah.
having these conversations is so important, to really put a spotlight and give the attention to these types of symptoms so that people can get help.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, not sure what platform you're going to be seeing this on, but if there is a comments area, um, we will be running these on YouTube, on Spotify, on all the different Apple, all the different platforms. Please, please, please reach out to us as
Yeah.
platforms continue to offer engagement, as we shift and we grow in the podcast, and we begin to have live callers call in, or have people call in and do recorded calls as well. We'll look at all these different options. We want your engagement. That is the whole point. This is not for us to get up here and just talk, or talk to each other and share this information. It's to allow you some additional knowledge that most people don't have about these subjects, some resources. And even if we're that first resource, to say, hey, I just want to talk about this. What does this sound like to you guys? Again, I'm going to finish the show with it today. It's not medical advice. Okay. It's simply a conversation that will help you understand that maybe that is something that you or your loved ones should look into. Right. So again, we appreciate your time. Jump in the comments anywhere, any way that you can, and come back next week, and we'll be talking about some of the more common ones a little deeper into it, and we'll be responding to any comments that we get that are available to reach out and comment on and help people with.
Yeah.
So,
And if anybody is really having a difficult time and does need, I know you mentioned this is not medical advice, but if you do recognize or believe that you are in need of medical advice, then send an email, send a message, and um, include where you're located, and we can send you some resources in your
yeah,
area.
yeah, you'll see that down in some of the descriptions for the cast, for the episode. You'll see how to contact us there, and we look forward to talking with you, sharing with you, and just engaging.
Thank
So
you. Thank
we'll
you for
see you next
having me,
week.
Michael. I appreciate it.
Having you.
Yeah.
You're going to be here every week.
Okay. Thank you for having me every
You're
week.
roped in.
Okay. Thank you
All
for
right.
roping me.
All right. We'll see you guys soon.